You hear me, old-timer? Or is that hearing aid of yours finally powered down for the night? Lieutenant Jax Miller asked, his voice cutting across the low, sticky atmosphere of the dive bar like a blade of obsidian. It wasn't just loud. It was engineered to intrude. Miller leaned far over the pitted, scarred wooden table, his shadow pooling over the solitary figure hunched in the darkest corner booth. Mark Douglas didn't flinch. He sat with the profound, unsettling stillness of a statue carved from ancient, weathered granite, his gaze meticulously locked on the shimmering, amber liquid held within the cheap shot glass before him. He was 72 years old, wearing a faded crimson shirt that had certainly survived several better decades, and a heavy canvas jacket that carried the faint, mingled scent of wet rain and distant wood smoke. His hands, resting flat on either side of the glass, were true mapworks of deep wrinkles and liver spots, but they were perfectly steady. Unnaturally steady. I said, "Are you stone deaf?" Miller repeated, escalating the volume and the aggression this time, fully performing for the small audience of 4 other young Navy SEALs gathered behind him. They clutched bottles of premium, expensive imported beer and wore synchronized grins that clearly broadcast the conviction that they, and they alone, currently owned the entire world. "We need this booth. It is for active duty only. The VFW Lodge is 2 blocks down the street," Miller announced, his tone now laced with territorial contempt. Mark slowly, deliberately lifted the glass to his lips. He took a long sip, tasting and savoring the immediate, raw burn of the bottom-shelf whiskey, and then set the glass back down onto the wood with a soft, precise clink that sounded deafening in the sudden, manufactured silence of their immediate area. Finally, he raised his eyes. They were a flat, pale gray, slightly misted by the sheer weight of age, yet possessing a density and depth that felt like peering down the shaft of a very deep, very cold ancient well. "I am fine right here, son," Mark said. His voice was a rasp, like loose gravel rolling down the steep face of a dry hill, an echo of things forgotten. Low, unbothered, Miller chuckled. A dry, purely humorless sound. He quickly glanced back at his squad, explicitly seeking their instantaneous validation for his superior wit. They promptly offered it with sharp snickers and vigorous, affirming nods. Miller turned back, his jaw muscle tightening, set like concrete. He was fresh off a textbook successful extraction mission, still riding the exhilarating, intoxicating high of adrenaline and the unshakable invincibility of callow youth. He saw nothing but an obsolete old man occupying what was clearly the best, most discreet seat in the house, a literal relic who demonstrably failed to understand the crucial hierarchy of the room they were currently in. "You do not get it?" Miller stated, placing a heavy, unwelcome hand flat on the table. A clear, aggressive invasion of Mark's minimal personal space. "We are celebrating. We are the tip of the spear. You are just passively taking up valuable space that others deserve. So unless you have a golden trident pinned under that ragged flannel, I strongly suggest you grab your walking cane and shuffle along." The confrontation had immediately begun, and the air within the bar grew instantly heavy, supercharged with a prickling, low-level static electricity that actually made the fine hair on the arms of the few other patrons stand straight up. Everyone looked, heads pivoting silently, but nobody dared to move. The Rusty Anchor was exactly the kind of bar, grimy and forgettable, that catered to the inevitable overflow of the nearby sprawling naval base, a place where a perpetually fresh layer of sawdust was habitually scattered to cover yesterday's vomit stains, and where the few surviving neon signs buzzed with an irritating, insectal, high-pitched hum. It was a space designed for the telling of loud, exaggerated stories and even louder, more impressive lies. But tonight, the tight group of young SEALs clustered in the center of the room had aggressively sucked all the ambient oxygen out of the space. They confidently thought, the apex predators here. Mark Douglas sighed, the sound conveying a profound weariness that had nothing whatsoever to do with fear. He adjusted his position subtly on the cracked, peeling vinyl bench, the material issuing a small, protesting crackle under his weight. He picked up a paper napkin and slowly, methodically, wiped a clean ring of condensation from the immediate table surface. "I paid for my drink," Mark said softly, his eyes still distant, I will leave when it is empty. Miller's face immediately flushed a hot, angry crimson. He was fundamentally unaccustomed to the blunt experience of being told no. Certainly not by a geriatric civilian who looked, objectively, like a stiff coastal breeze would be enough to knock him completely over. Miller's ego was a notoriously fragile construct, currently inflated to unsustainable levels by his recent battlefield victories. And this quiet, absolute refusal felt exactly like a sharp needle painfully pricking a fully taut balloon. Look at him, Davis, one of the other SEALs, chimed in, stepping forward eagerly. He probably thinks he's tough because he did a tour in the mess hall back in '75. Hey, Grandpa, what was your actual specialty? Peeling potatoes or scrubbing out the latrines? The group erupted in simultaneous, sharp laughter. It was cruel, precise laughter specifically engineered to cut deep and draw blood. Mark did not physically flinch. He continued to simply stare at his drink, watching the yellow light from the bar refract unevenly through the warm whiskey. You boys should show some respect, said a heavily accented voice from behind the scarred bar. Sully, the bartender, was a physically large man with a thick, untrimmed beard and a personal history in the Marine Corps that he extremely rarely spoke about. He was currently wiping a glass with swift, aggressive motions. He is not bothering anyone. Stay out of this, Sully, Miller snapped dismissively without bothering to look back. This is strictly Navy business. We're just trying to figure out precisely who we are sharing our expensive air with. Miller redirected his focused attention back to Mark, his eyes narrowing critically. He noticed the way Mark sat. It wasn't the defeated slouch of a beaten man. It was, rather, the unnerving stillness of an experienced hunter concealed within a blind. Though Miller was far too young and far too arrogantly conditioned to recognize the crucial difference, he instinctively mistook the absolute stillness for paralysis driven by fear. Come on, Miller. The SEAL lieutenant leaned in closer, goading him, the heavy smell of expensive, premium beer on his breath wafting offensively into Mark's face. If you are going to sit at the Warriors' table tonight, you have to pay the toll. Tell us about your service. Who were you, really? Did you ever even get to leave the ship? Mark remained perfectly silent, unmoving. I bet I know, Miller continued, his voice now dripping with heavy, cloying condescension. You were a clerk, maybe supply. You spent all your time counting cheap beans while real men were out there doing the actual work that let you sleep soundly at night. That is it, isn't it? Mark reached into the deep pocket of his canvas jacket. The movement was executed so astonishingly fast that for a brief, electric split second, Miller physically flinched, his hand twitching involuntarily toward his own waistband before he forcibly stopped himself. He instantly realized how foolish and unprofessional he looked, instinctively reacting to an old man simply reaching for a wallet. Mark pulled out a crumpled $10 bill and placed it meticulously on the table. For the drink, Mark said to Sully, and then he started to slowly slide himself out of the booth. He had instantly decided that this escalating situation simply wasn't worth the trouble. The quiet dignity of a measured retreat was infinitely preferable to a messy, physical brawl with these self-important children. But Miller wasn't finished, not by a long shot. He felt the sting of the flinch he had made, and it had profoundly shamed him. He desperately needed to immediately regain the psychological upper hand. He stepped swiftly in front of Mark, aggressively blocking his path toward the exit. Not so fast, Miller said, crossing his arms and planting his feet. You do not just walk away when I am still speaking directly to you. You want to leave? You answer one question first. Mark stopped cold. He looked up, directly into Miller's face, and for the very first time, a sharp, brief flicker of pure annoyance crossed his face. It was fleeting, like a barely visible ripple disturbing the surface of a pond, but it was absolutely there. Get out of my way, son, Mark said. Miller laughed dismissively. Or what? You gonna hit me with your crippling arthritis? Look, it is a simple question. In the teams, we all have call signs, names that are truly earned in blood and mud, names that actually mean something. I am Viper. That is what they call me because I strike before they even know I am there. He pointed to Davis. That is Sledge. He breaks things. Miller leaned in aggressively, his face now mere inches from Mark's. So if you were ever anything more than a paper pusher in a back office, you would have a name. What is it, old man? What is your call sign? Or did they just call you Private Pile? The bar went instantly dead silent. The loaded question hung suffocatingly in the air. A brazen challenge that demanded an immediate, unequivocal answer. The disrespect was palpable, a genuine physical weight pressing down heavily on every soul in the room. Mark Douglas looked at Jax Miller, truly looked at him, and for one agonizing second, the grimy dive bar dissolved completely. The immediate smells of stale beer and cheap floor wax vanished instantly, replaced by the thick, rotting stench of a hot jungle floor. The air was no longer conditioned and cool. It was a suffocating, heavy blanket of extreme humidity and jungle heat. The buzzing neon lights were gone, replaced by the silver, curved sliver of a crescent moon attempting to cut through the oppressive triple canopy rainforest. Mark was young again in this jarring flash. Mud was smeared strategically across his face, his breathing shallow and expertly controlled. He was holding a knife, not a drink glass. He was utterly alone. He had been alone for 3 excruciating days behind enemy lines, tracking a high-value target that entire battalions had previously failed to find. He moved through the dense foliage without displacing a single leaf or snapping a single twig. He was a ghost. He was a living myth whispered among the frightened enemy ranks. He remembered the voice of his commanding officer over the radio, the static crackling like dry ice, saying, "We have no assets in the area. You are on your own, Reaper." Reaper. The word echoed powerfully in his mind, bringing with it the immediate memories of terrible things done in the absolute dark, of burdens carried silently so that countless others could afford to live in the light. The sheer weight of that name was heavier than any armor plating. It was a name spoken only in hushed, reverent whispers by allies, and in sheer, terrified screams by those he hunted. The flash ended as quickly as the detonation of a distant mine. Mark blinked once, and the impenetrable jungle faded instantly back into the grimy, sticky reality of the rusty anchor. He looked at the young, self-satisfied, arrogant face of Lieutenant Miller. He felt a profound, deep-seated sense of pity. "You do not want to know," Mark said softly. Miller threw his head back and let out a loud, mocking laugh. "Oh, I think I do. I think the whole bar needs to know. Come on, let's hear it. What did they call the man who filed the requisitions? Speedy the stapler?" Sully, the massive bartender, had seen enough action to know how this was going to end. He had been watching Mark with unnerving closeness, not with the eyes of a disinterested civilian, but with the keenly observant eyes of a man who had seen real combat up close. When Mark had initially reached for his wallet, his jacket sleeve had ridden up just an inch. It was a minuscule thing, completely unnoticed by the loud, distracted seals, but Sully had instantly registered it. It wasn't a cheap tattoo. It was a scar, a definitive burn mark, perfectly circular, branded deeply into the inside of the man's wrist. Sully froze completely. He had heard the chilling stories about that exact mark. Rumors passed down in terrified, hushed tones within NCO clubs and drafty barracks for 40 years. It was the indelible mark of a hyper-clandestine unit that didn't officially exist on paper. A unit that operated so far off the books that the CIA would categorically deny any knowledge of their existence under torture. They were the cold, precise ghosts of the Vietnam era and the early, dark heart of the Cold War. Sully dropped the rag he was holding, the cloth hitting the floor with a damp, unnoticed thwump. His heart hammered uncontrollably against his ribs. He looked at the old man. The absolute stillness, the unervingly dead eyes, the complete and total lack of fear, and the scattered pieces of the puzzle violently clicked into place. This wasn't just a veteran killing time. This was a walking legend of American black operations. Sully backed swiftly away from the bar, moving toward the small office door in the rear. He needed to make a specific call. There was a private, unlisted number taped securely to the inside of the safe door, a number given to him by the owner of the bar, a retired 3-star admiral, with the strictest instructions imaginable. Asterisk: if you ever see a man with a circular brand on his right wrist, you call this number. You do not ask questions. You do not engage. You call. Sully burst into the cramped office, his hands trembling violently as he rapidly dialed the number. He listened to the nerve-wracking ring, feeling the seconds tick by like pressurized hours. Hello? A voice answered immediately. It was sharp, instantly authoritative, and used to immediate compliance. This is Sully at the Rusty Anchor, he stammered, licking his dry lips. I think he is here. Who is here? The Reaper. Sully whispered the name, the word catching in his throat. The man with the circle brand. He is here, and there is a group of young frogs giving him a hard time. It is about to get extremely ugly. There was a silence on the other end of the line, a profound void so deep that Sully genuinely thought the call had dropped dead. Then the voice returned, colder than ice. Every syllable weighted with catastrophic command. Colder than ice. Do not let them touch him. Do not let them disrespect him in any way. I am 3 minutes away. Keep the peace, Sully, or God help us all. Back in the main room, the tension had stretched taut, reaching its absolute breaking point. Miller was no longer even attempting to laugh. The old man's resolute refusal to participate in the degrading game was infuriating him, making him feel dismissed. It felt like a direct, personal challenge to his newfound authority. I am now making this a direct order, Miller barked, his voice cracking slightly under the pressure. I am a commissioned officer in the United States Navy. You will identify yourself immediately, and you will vacate this table and premises. Mark stood up slowly. He moved with audible effort, his joints making distinct popping sounds. He stood at his full height, which was only 5 feet 9 inches, significantly shorter than Miller's tall frame. But somehow, in that singular moment, he seemed to physically loom over the lieutenant. I was serving this country before your father was a glint in the milkman's eye, Mark said, his voice now steady and imbued with cold finality. I have earned my seat. Now move. Miller's face instantly went purple with enraged indignation. You listen to me, you washed-up old. He reached out and physically shoved Mark. It wasn't a genuinely violent strike, just a forceful push to the shoulder, intended solely to emphasize his point and physically move the immovable obstacle. The instant Miller's hand made blunt contact with Mark's canvas jacket, the air in the room seemed to shatter into 1,000 pieces. Mark did not stumble. He didn't even sway an inch. He simply looked down at the offending hand resting on his shoulder, then slowly up at Miller's face. That was a mistake, Mark whispered, the tone devoid of heat, yet utterly chilling. Sully came barreling out from behind the bar, vaulting awkwardly over the counter in his haste. Lieutenant, stand down. That is a direct order from the owner. Stand down. Miller spun around violently. Shut up, Sully. This civilian put his hands on me first. He is not a civilian, you idiot. Sully roared, placing his massive body squarely between the two men. Miller shoved Sully hard aside, his blood boiling over. He turned back instantly to Mark, his fists instinctively clenched. I am going to teach you a painful lesson in respect, old man. Miller raised his hand, fully intending to grab Mark by the collar and aggressively drag him out the front door. He wanted to humiliate him utterly, to definitively show the entire room who the alpha male truly was. He was far past the point of any reason or caution. Then the front door of the bar exploded inward. It wasn't merely a kick. It was more like a physical tidal wave of irresistible force. The heavy oak door slammed against the interior wall with a crack that sounded precisely like a high-powered gunshot. Every single head in the bar snapped instantly toward the violent entrance. Standing imposingly in the doorway was not a fleet of MPs. It was a single, solitary man. He was wearing a meticulously starched dress blue uniform, immaculate and sharp, with rows of brilliantly colored ribbons stacked almost to his shoulder. The gleaming stars on his collar caught the erratic neon light. It was Admiral Vance, the revered base commander himself. Behind him stood 2 massive men in dark, perfectly tailored suits, their earpieces visible, their posture radiating a lethal, focused intent that was unmistakable. Admiral Vance stepped deliberately into the room. The silence that instantly fell was absolute, a profound vacuum where all noise had been. The music had been abruptly cut. The clinking of glasses ceased entirely. Even the breathing seemed to stop. Miller froze instantly. His hands were still half raised toward Mark, his eyes widening in shock as he recognized the figure of the Admiral. He snapped rigidly to attention so fast that his spine audibly cracked. "Admiral on deck," Miller shouted, his voice trembling uncontrollably. The other SEALs scrambled frantically to attention, spilling expensive beer in their terrified haste. They stood rigid, eyes locked straight forward, terror and utter confusion replacing the earlier, casual arrogance on their faces. Admiral Vance did not acknowledge them. He did not even spare them a single glance. His eyes were locked solely on the old man sitting placidly in the corner booth. Vance walked across the room, his polished dress shoes clicking rhythmically on the worn hardwood floor. The sound was the only thing existing in the universe. He marched straight past Lieutenant Miller, brushing the lieutenant's shoulder as if he were nothing more than a discarded piece of forgotten furniture. Vance stopped 3 feet in front of Mark Douglas. The Admiral's face was a mask of cold stone, but his eyes were faintly shimmering with undisguised emotion. He looked intently at Mark's weathered face, the gray stubble, the profoundly weary eyes. Then slowly, with a precision and snap that would have made any drill instructor openly weep, Admiral Vance raised his hand in a flawless salute. It wasn't a perfunctory, required salute. It was a salute of deep, abiding, historical reverence. He held it. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds. Mark Douglas looked calmly at the Admiral. A small, crooked, knowing smile touched his lips. He slowly raised his own hand and returned the salute casually, but with the fluid grace of muscle memory that genuinely never fades. "At ease, David," Mark said softly. Admiral Vance immediately dropped his hand. He let out a long, shuddering breath he seemed to have been holding for years. "It has been a long time, Master Chief," Vance said, his voice thick with powerful emotion. "We thought you were dead. We lost track of you completely after Panama." "I like being dead," Mark replied, sitting back down comfortably on the bench. "It is quieter." The room remained absolutely frozen in time. Miller and his squad were paralyzed, their minds racing in a desperate, frantic attempt to compute what catastrophic event was unfolding. Master Chief? Panama? The base admiral was saluting an enlisted man. Admiral Vance turned slowly on his heel. The fleeting warmth vanished instantly from his face, replaced by a cold, surgical fury that made the earlier tension feel like a harmless playground squabble. He looked directly at Lieutenant Miller. Miller was sweating profusely, the droplets running visibly down his temple. "Lieutenant," Vance said, his voice dangerously low, almost a vibration. "Sir," Miller squeaked out the reply. "Do you know who this man is?" "No, sir. He wouldn't give his name, sir. He was refusing to vacate the booth for active duty personnel, sir." Vance stepped closer to Miller. He aggressively invaded his space, exactly as Miller had invaded Mark's. "This man," Vance said, projecting his voice so every soul huddled in the bar could hear the awful clarity of his words, "is Mark Douglas. But you wouldn't find him in your neat little databases. His file is completely black. It has been black since 1968. Vance pointed a trembling finger directly at Mark. "When I was a brand new ensign navigating the Mekong Delta, my patrol boat was ambushed violently. We were taking heavy, concentrated fire from 3 separate sides. We were sinking. We called for air support, but the weather was too bad. We called for extraction, but they said it was too hot a zone. We were dead men waiting." Vance paused, his eyes boring holes into Miller. Then out of the treeline, one man came. One man. He didn't have a squad. He didn't have air support. He had a knife and a single rifle. He moved through that ambush like a scythe through ripe wheat. He silenced 3 heavy machine gun nests in under 4 minutes flat. He dragged me and 6 of my wounded men 3 miles through a leech-infested swamp with a bullet searing in his leg. Vance looked back at Mark with profound reverence. "We asked him his name. He didn't say a word. We asked for his call sign. He just looked at us and disappeared back into the endless jungle. We later found out the enemy had a name for him. They called him the Reaper, because when he showed up, life ended for them. Miller's face was the sickening color of wet ash. He looked at the quiet old man in the faded red shirt, the man he had mocked, the man he had just physically tried to remove. He felt a profound wave of acidic nausea rising sharply in his gut. Vance turned back to Miller, his voice now a controlled roar. "You asked for his call sign, Lieutenant. You wanted to know if he was a cook. This man has more confirmed kills with a blade than you have total days in the service. He is the foundational reason the SEAL teams have the global reputation they do. He wrote the operational doctrine you are desperately trying to learn. And you tried to throw him out of a bar." Miller couldn't speak. His mouth opened and closed uselessly like a fish pulled from water. I said. Vance roared, the sound shaking the dusty walls. "You are an officer. You are supposed to be a leader of men. And here you are, bullying an old man because you mistakenly think your trident pin makes you a god. This man earned his trident before the device even existed. He is the literal grandfather of your warfare, and you treated him like garbage." Vance violently ripped the unit patch off Miller's uniform shoulder, the sound of the Velcro tearing loud and brutal. "You are a disgrace to the uniform, Lieutenant. You and your men are confined to quarters immediately, effective this moment. You will face a board of inquiry tomorrow morning at 0800. I will personally strip you of your command. Now get out of my sight before I forget that I am an officer and handle this the way the Master Chief would have. Get out." Miller and his squad scrambled instantly. They stumbled over each other in their desperate haste to reach the door. They didn't dare look back. They fled into the cool night, their careers incinerated, their arrogance absolutely shattered. The door swung shut behind them, leaving a profound, ringing silence in the small bar. Admiral Vance turned back to Mark Douglas. He composed himself, smoothing the wrinkles in his perfectly tailored uniform. "I apologize, Mark. I should have taught them better. The standards are slipping badly." Mark chuckled softly. He pushed the now empty shot glass toward the center of the table. "They are young, David. They are full of fire and vinegar. They just haven't been truly burned yet. Do not be too hard on them. They just need to learn that the ocean is deep, and there are always bigger fish lurking below." Vance nodded solemnly. "Can I buy you a drink, Reaper? For old time's sake?" Mark shook his head gently as he stood up, his knees cracking audibly again. "No, I think I have had more than enough noise for one night. I just wanted one quiet drink." He buttoned his canvas jacket over the red shirt. He looked small again, just a tired old man ready for bed. But nobody in that room, filled with roughnecks and seasoned sailors, would ever again dare to dismiss him as merely an old man. As Mark turned and began his measured walk toward the exit, the diverse patrons of the bar, the grizzled bikers, the local shipyard workers, the uniformed off-duty sailors, parted before him. They rose in scattered but synchronized increments, a silent, heavy ripple washing across the room. It was not the crisp, perfect alignment of a military formation, but a ragged, imperfect, profoundly messy line of earned respect. Mark moved through the sudden void. As he passed, heads bowed slightly, not in subservience, but in acknowledgement of a truth too heavy for words. Someone in the back began to clap, a slow, deep rhythm, and then immediately ceased, realizing that profound, absolute silence was the only honor worthy of the moment. Mark paused at the door, his hand resting on the cool brass. He looked back at Admiral Vance, who had not moved from his spot. "David," he said, his voice flat and neutral. "Yes, Mark. Tell the bartender the kid paid for my drink." He left a crisp $10 bill on the scarred wooden table, a symbolic gesture. "But tell him the kid's ego should cover the rest of the tab." Mark pushed the swinging door open and stepped out into the crisp, cool coastal night air, disappearing instantly. Vance watched the door sway shut, an expression carved of profound sadness and undeniable pride etched onto his face. He walked slowly over to the booth where Mark had been sitting. He picked up the empty, cheap shot glass. He held it up to the faint, flickering light of the neon sign, as if seeking an answer in the swirling condensation. For a long, significant moment, the bar remained absolutely silent, held captive by the memory of the past 20 minutes. Then Sully, the bartender, a man accustomed to conflict but rattled by this strange, quiet display, nervously cleared his throat. "Admiral, what can I get you?" Vance set the glass down gently, placing it precisely on the water stain Mark had left, the one he had tried to rub away. "Nothing, Sully. Just leave this glass here. Nobody sits at this table tonight. It is closed." Vance turned to face the entire room, his commanding presence instantly filling the silence. His gaze swept over every single face. Bikers, sailors, locals. "You all saw nothing tonight. Nothing happened here. Is that perfectly clear?" "Clear, Admiral." A unified, solemn chorus of voices replied, the sound like the rush of wind. The Admiral gave a curt nod, a subtle acknowledgement of their obedience, and strode out, his personal security detail flanking him closely, disappearing the way Mark had. The door settled shut. The incessant, slightly maddening hum of the neon sign outside instantly returned to claim the silence. The jukebox remained stubbornly off. Sully walked over to the legendary table. He looked at the perfect ring left by the shot glass, the faint moisture now drying rapidly on the dark wood. He looked at the empty glass itself, still faintly reflecting the light. The jungle rain is not rain. It is a solid sheet of water, torrential and relentless, hammering against the immense banana leaves and the thick canopy above like sustained machine gun fire. Flak falling from the sky. The year is 1969. Mark is 22 years old, barely a man. He is lying face down in the viscous, rotting mud, covered head to toe in fat, black leeches that pull his blood into their bodies. He has been motionless, locked into a state of suspended animation, for 12 grueling hours. Below him, nestled deep within the valley floor, is a makeshift prisoner camp. He can see the weak, broken forms of the American P.O.W.S. ghosts held against their will. He sees the heavy-set, complacent guards making their rounds. He checks the glow of his watch. He feels the cold certainty of the knife sheathed against his forearm. He touches the circular, puckered burn on the inside of his wrist, a self-inflicted scar, a permanent reminder of the unending, merciless circle of life and sudden death that defines his existence. Slowly, deliberately, he stands up. The thick mud slides off his camouflaged skin like oil or melted wax. He does not run, nor does he stride. He flows. He moves toward the perimeter of the camp, a detached shadow, a whisper of movement undetectable against the deepest black of the night. The first guard dies without a cough, without a gasp, his consciousness extinguished before his body hits the earth. The second guard sees him, but sees only a blur, a horrific, impossibly fast phantom. A wraith, a reaper coming to collect the debt owed to him by the jungle. Mark whispers one single word into the oppressive darkness as he begins the grim, precise work that must be done. *home. Back in the rusty anchor, the atmosphere had permanently and irrevocably shifted. The air felt heavy, almost hallowed, saturated with the weight of unseen history. In the days that followed, the astonishing, unbelievable story of what happened between the lieutenant and the old man spread like wildfire through the entire naval base and the surrounding town. Though no names, especially not Mark's, were ever officially used in any internal report, Lieutenant Miller was quietly, humiliatingly transferred to a remote desk job processing requisitions in a cold, bureaucratic post in Anchorage, Alaska. The other members of his arrogant squad were immediately put through a grueling, weeks-long retraining program focused entirely on military history, ethical conduct, and, most importantly, humility. A week later, a small, weighty package arrived anonymously at the bar, addressed simply to Sully. Inside was a bottle of very expensive, impossibly old single-malt Scotch whiskey, the label reading a year few people in the room had lived through. Tucked beside it was a fragile note written in shaky, elegant cursive on thick parchment. It read, **, keep the table open. **, the signature was a looping, almost forgotten nickname, Miner Mac. Mark never came back to the rusty anchor. He didn't need to. He had secured his profound quiet. He had re-established his dignity and the honor of his generation. And he had reminded a new, complacent generation that the most dangerous, effective forces in the world often looked the most unassuming, blending into the routine landscape. Somewhere in a small, well-kept house on the quiet edge of town, an old man sat on his sunny porch, calmly sipping coffee, watching the gentle sunrise over the bay. His hands were absolutely steady as he lifted the mug, his clear eyes perpetually scanning the horizon. To his trusting neighbors, he was simply Mark, the quiet veteran next door. But to those who knew the truth, to those who had experienced the sudden, terrifying drop in emotional temperature when he spoke, he would always be known only as the Reaper. And the profound silence he left behind, the silence of history, sacrifice, and absolute control, was the loudest, most deafening sound the world had ever heard. If you enjoyed this story of hidden valor and the harsh lessons learned the hardest way, please take a moment to like this video and share it with a friend who understands honor. Subscribe to Veteran Valor for more stories about the heroes walking quietly among us.